From remakes on the SNES to early emulation experiments on GameCube, virtual console services on Wii, 3DS, and Wii U, and then the miniature NES Classic Edition, Nintendo is no doubt well aware of the power of nostalgia held by its iconic Nintendo Entertainment System. While the Virtual Console brand appears to be retired for now, the newest official emulation method is the belated arrival of NES games via Nintendo Switch Online, launched on September 18, 2018, with a starting selection of 20 games included with the paid online play service. Nintendo's presentation of NES games has had a lot of ups and downs. Have they finally tweaked their emulation to perfection on the Switch? Let's find out how it compares to the Wii, 3DS, Wii U, NES Classic Edition, and of course, original hardware, mods, and high-tech alternatives.
Released in 1983 in Japan as the family computer, the NES wasn't exactly cutting edge even during its prime, but Nintendo's approach to marketing and game development turned it into a phenomenon that pretty much established video games as we know them today. The NES represents a simpler and more carefree time, and much of its library remains well worth playing today. As was standard for the time, NES consoles output video at an ultra-low progressive resolution, 240p. The NES color palette does not have defined RGB values, as the video hardware only generates composite video, which can be output as RF or natively through RCA cables. It's pretty poor quality, especially when used with modern displays or capture cards, but it's certainly a valid argument that the messy image gives certain games a more textured feel. Composite may be nostalgic, but these days we prefer to play on consoles modded for RGB or HDMI. The RGB mod, developed by Tim Worthington, is simply beautiful, resulting in a clean image that is suitable for devices that can accept 15 kHz RGB signals, such as professional CRTs, European TVs, or video processors that convert analog signals to a higher resolution HDMI output, such as the Framemeister or open source scan converter. The HDMI mod by Kevtris, called High Def NES, can natively output 480p, 720p, or 1080p, with vertical scaling up to 4x. This is a pure digital output, and needless to say, it's sharp and noise-free. Note that the NES aspect ratio does not use square pixels, meaning that a square pixel aspect is too skinny. However, as is the case with many pure digital output options, including Nintendo's own NES Classic Edition, the correct aspect results in uneven pixel columns, accompanied by a noticeable shimmer while the screen scrolls. Luckily, this can be fixed on the high-def NES with 5x horizontal sizing to keep a clean integer scale, even if it's just a touch too wide. FPGA-based hardware reproductions, such as Kevtris' NT Mini or the AVS by Retro USB, also natively output over HDMI. While these aren't true original hardware solutions, they generally operate in a manner that is virtually indistinguishable from the original hardware. The NT Mini can output up to 1080p with up to 5x scaling, while the AVS is 720p only. But it's worth noting that the AVS has received a firmware update that adds interpolation, which optionally smooths the horizontal axis. This makes it possible to dial in a more accurate CRT-like aspect ratio, while minimizing shimmer issues due to uneven scaling. Of course, not everyone is crazy enough to take the path of original hardware, mods, or pricey hardware alternatives, and that's why software emulation is so important for keeping vintage games in the public consciousness. Granted, Nintendo has yet to provide a totally robust service for this themselves, and there's a lot of debate right now regarding the issue of Nintendo stamping out community efforts that keep games preserved and accessible, whether they're classic, obscure, or nearly lost. The dream of a near comprehensive virtual console library is probably a bit unrealistic. In general though, we've enjoyed the virtual console, limited as it may be. Analog output makes the Wii Virtual Console the most interesting to us. With the Wii system set to 480i, most virtual console games output their original 240p resolution. This, combined with component video output, is ideal for sending to CRTs or external upscalers like the OSSC and Framemeister. Even though it's emulation, this goes a long way to making the games feel very authentic. If you opt against an external video processor, you may need to set your Wii console to 480p instead, since many HD TVs will not handle 240p correctly, or may not even accept the signal at all. The option is rather blurry though compared to a properly upscaled 240p, but it may be your best choice depending on your situation. Unfortunately, NES games are noticeably darker through the Wii Virtual Console than most other emulated systems, such as the SNES or Genesis. This is believed to be a precaution against epileptic seizures due to the flashing effects that retro games sometimes use. But the darkening is so extreme that it's hard to decide whether it's much of an overall upgrade next to the NES's composite. As for the Wii U, 240p output is not possible at all, even with analog cables using the system's Wii mode. NES on the Wii U is similarly dark, with a blurry image stretched in all directions. The situation on the gamepad screen is sadly no better. While we applaud the Wii U for its excellent Game Boy Advance Virtual Console, the NES is sadly unimproved, aside from the additions of restore points and mappable buttons. Now the NES Virtual Console on 3DS? Well, it's actually quite interesting. These renditions suffer much less from a darkened image and benefit greatly from the 3DS's 240 pixel vertical resolution. This is a perfect match for most retro games, and the 3DS screen even has a natural scanline look when 3D is not in use. Horizontal interpolation softens the x-axis, allowing for a correctly stretched aspect ratio, while also reducing scrolling shimmer. Overall, it's a pretty great implementation for such a low-resolution screen. The popular NES Classic Edition is a bit of a double-edged sword. While it doesn't offer interpolation, and weirdly exhibits a bit of noise, the color palette is extremely close to the original, and the brightness is just the right level. The system only outputs 720p over HDMI. While the lack of interpolation causes a lot of shimmering artifacts when using the correct 4:3 aspect ratio, a CRT filter mode actually does a shockingly respectable job of reproducing the feel of NES composite with scan lines while smoothing the horizontal axis. With the SNES Classic Edition, a fairly decent horizontal interpolation effect was added for the 4:3 mode, but this feature remains absent from even the newer revisions of the NES Classic Edition. A sort of softening effect sometimes comes into play as the new anti-epilepsy measure, which looks a bit odd. But we'd say that this is overall preferable to a dark picture. If you've chosen to hack your console, this effect can be removed. One thing that must be addressed with all these emulation options is input lag, which is an inherent part of the process. A number of factors can contribute to this, such as how the controllers interface with the system, or whether you have a relatively low latency display. While we don't have the means to produce scientific lag measurements, it's important to understand that lag does exist in all emulation-based solutions to some degree. While we feel that games remain very playable in the cases presented here, others may disagree. In addition to input lag, audio lag is an issue that seems to be cropping up more and more with emulation these days. In particular, delayed sound effects on the NES Classic Edition can be especially noticeable at times. So, all of this gives us a pretty good idea of what to look for with NES games on Nintendo Switch. While the official emulation options play accurately for the most part, Nintendo has seemed to struggle a little bit to figure out how to best present the NES's visuals. And how about input lag, sound lag, and any additional features? It's time to check out the next step in the NES emulation evolution.
We knew this day was coming since before the Switch launched, but after 13 years of free Nintendo Online play, it still stings a bit to have it taken away. Nintendo may have been late to online gaming, but at least they were also slow to make the move to paid service. All the same, at $20 a year, it's surprisingly affordable, although the NES games do seem kinda shoehorned in to make us believe we're gaining something in the process. Either way, we're not here to debate the value of all this, we're just here to see if these NES games are presented any better or worse than Nintendo's previous attempts. The starting lineup is, with a few exceptions, a poor representation of the system's greatness, but for now it's what we've got to work with. The good news is that there's not much bad news, so let's get the bad news out of the way first. One area where NES on the Wii U actually did something right was having the option for remapping buttons. This is not possible on Switch, at least not at launch. It's not so bad with the tighter spacing of Joy-Con buttons, but potentially problematic with the Pro Controller. The X button can also serve as the B button if you're more comfortable holding that angle. But the biggest problem, almost a deal breaker for us, is a persistent border that seems to have no option for turning off. To be fair, it's overall a pretty inoffensive border, except for the controls text at the bottom. It's certainly not ideal for people who have screens that might be susceptible to image retention or burn-in. Speaking of which, the morning after Switch NES service launched, reports emerged that the behavior of the CRT filter was causing an unusual sort of image retention on some LCD screens. Thankfully, it sounds like it's not causing any permanent burn-in, but I imagine it's gotta be a gut-wrenching thing to see it happen even temporarily. We don't want to blow it out of proportion, and we're not quite clear on the exact mechanism here, but hopefully the behavior can be patched in the future. NES games are contained within a single Nintendo Entertainment System app on the Switch dashboard. The presentation is simple, but pleasing and easy to use. With the NES app loaded, the tiny game ROMs launch near instantaneously, which feels great. It's immediately apparent that the games are represented better here than any previous official emulation option, with an excellent color palette, ideal brightness levels, superior scaling, and none of the slight noise seen in the NES Classic Edition. The settings cog on the main menu allows the selection of 3 display modes: 4:3, Pixel Perfect, and CRT Filter. Let's start from the bottom. As previously mentioned, the CRT filter simulates the look of composite video from a real NES, and it's overall a pretty decent facsimile, also adding a faint scanline effect. It's rather similar to the equivalent option on the NES Classic Edition, although that rendition features slightly more prominent scanline depth and a softer feel overall. This made us wonder if setting the Switch system to 720p would soften the look in a similar way, but the result appears very similar between 720p and 1080p. With the Switch system set to 1080p, Pixel Perfect mode seems to perform 4x integer scaling both vertically and horizontally. At a glance, this may seem like the way to go, but technically it's much too skinny compared to a CRT's 4:3 aspect. Within a 1080p frame, 4x scaling doesn't quite fill the vertical space, so you'll notice a bit of extra black letterboxing above and below the game window. Luckily, the scaling here is pretty smart, adapting whether the system is set to 1080p or 720p. Of course, 240 times 3 is 720, so when set for 720p, a 3x integer scale is performed in both axes, which will fill your TV's vertical space, save for the annoying button info at the bottom, which simply covers some of the game's overscan. Naturally, the 3x scaling mode is the same one used when the Switch is undocked, a pixel perfect fit for its native 720p screen, lending to an extremely crisp presentation. 4:3 mode is the default and my personal preference. This aspect ratio uses non-square pixels, stretching the image just enough to feel like the proper CRT sizing. Through the magic of interpolation, the overall presentation remains sharp, in stark contrast to the NES on the Wii U, but the pixel edges are softened just a touch so that the scaling appears even across the screen. This virtually eliminates the shimmering screen scrolling artifacts that plague the NES Classic Edition and other pure digital NES options. Interpolation is used horizontally as well as vertically, which means that the image can fill the vertical space more fully than Pixel Perfect mode at 1080p. High quality interpolation is not at all as common in this sort of product as we feel it should be, and we're extremely grateful that we've got it here. When playing in 720p, such as when undocked, 4:3 mode performs a clean 3x integer scale vertically, using interpolation only on the horizontal axis. This retains an extremely crisp overall appearance on the Switch screen. While the natural scanline appearance of the 3DS is missed a bit here, the Switch's 1280 by 720 resolution allows for a much higher quality horizontal interpolation. It should be noted that there's no 16:9 stretch option. While we would never use it ourselves, it's strange to see it missing as some players might prefer to fill the screen this way. In theory, this option would also remove the borders, then you could correct it to 4:3 using your TV's aspect setting. Note that the settings and functionality of the NES app has nothing in common with the Arcade Archives releases on Switch by Hamster Corporation. Despite some of these being Nintendo games on NES arcade hardware, such as vs. Super Mario Bros., the interface and scaling tools are Hamster's own work, which is similar to their releases on other platforms such as Mr. Goemon, shown here running on PlayStation 4. Arcade Archives does provide an interesting point of comparison though. The colors look garish because of the RGB palette used on Nintendo's arcade hardware at the time. Hamster's settings allow for deeper scan lines modeled more after an RGB monitor instead of composite video. Sharp pixel scaling is possible with vs. Super Mario Bros., although I didn't quite succeed at dialing in a 4x vertical, 5x horizontal integer scale, leaving a bit of shimmer, but hey, at least Hamster lets me turn off the border, Nintendo. As is standard now, Nintendo is erring on the side of caution by eliminating full screen flashing. Similar to the NES Classic Edition, an emulator feature appears to be watching for these situations and counteracts the effect in real time. It's rather bizarre looking, especially if you freeze frame it, but it's not a big deal in general. Interestingly, some flashes seem to be removed altogether, such as the warp whistle effect in Mario 3. An edited ROM maybe? One feature that's been improved with the NES on Switch over previous official emulation is save states, with each game having 4 dedicated save slots and an easy-to-use menu. Of course, one of the biggest new features is online play, something not possible with Virtual Console. We think it's important to keep in mind that these are games designed in the 80s and early 90s intended for play on hardware and displays that are completely unlike modern technology, and as such aren't designed around the latency and other factors that come into play with online gaming. When a friend joins your session, it's designed to feel as much like playing NES in the same room as possible. You can jump around seamlessly from game to game together, even single-player games, so the second player gets to watch. The right analog stick lets you point and gesture at where to go, just like your friends might do in person. But one area where it simply feels different is input lag. Jumps will feel stickier due to syncing 2 systems across a great distance. This can be alleviated to some degree by going to the settings menu and choosing low latency mode during an online session. The lag is improved noticeably with this option, although in its effort to keep up, weird sounding graphical issues can occur, like this moment we captured in 2-player Super Mario Bros. Didn't stop me from doing pretty darn decent though. But even with low latency mode, after playing online for a bit and returning to offline play, it's immediately noticeable how much better the input lag is. Again, we wouldn't want to claim that we can really get scientific results here, but we believe the lag situation is quite good. Notice that on original hardware through a CRT using the NES Advantage input LEDs as an indicator, Mario's jump begins 2 frames after the LED lights up. It's harder to tell with the Switch Joy-Con, but the jump appears to begin within 3 to 4 frames after the button is depressed, suggesting that the discrepancy between a CRT and the Switch is between a 60th and 1/30th of a second. Not bad at all in our books, but don't take our humble tests as the definitive results. Naturally, input lag with TV output depends on how fast your TV's response is when in game mode. Unfortunately, sound lag is back to some degree. We estimate that it's about 6 to 7 frames of delayed sound effects in comparison to what seems to be 11 to 12 frames on the NES Classic Edition. And it also seems to be an improvement over sound lag on the Wii Virtual Console, a problem we didn't even catch on to at the time, so it's probably close enough that most people won't really notice while playing. Well, that about covers it for now. The games look great, feel great, and we're looking forward to playing some NES games on future travels, if Fire Emblem and Octopath Traveler just seem too daunting. But it's so close to perfect enough for official emulation anyway, that the small things like the forced border are really frustrating. Hopefully these things might be improved in the future as the library expands. And there are still a lot of unknowns. How often will games be added? Will some titles be cycled off the roster after a while? Could we see a similar service for SNES and other consoles in the future? Whatever the case, we're mostly very happy with the presentation of NES games on Nintendo Switch. So however you choose to play them, RGB, HDMI, your computer, Virtual Console, NES Classic, Switch, or just plain old composite, go enjoy you some NES games. Real good stuff.